Krishna, Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Rama.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Haribol, going to begin? Yeah. Where's our host and hostess? I want to do a little introduction of our topic for this evening. There you are. This evening I wanted to read something from a biography in the life of Bhakti Vinod Thakura, but I think I should give a little background on who is Bhakti Vinod Thakura. Yes? You know who Srila Prabhupada is. Yes? Our founder Acharya. His spiritual master, Bhakti Siddhanta. Bhakti Siddhanta was the son of a previous Acharya named Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Bhaktivinoda Thakur lived from the something like 1840 until 1914, something like that. Gives you the span of his life. He was born in a very wealthy aristocratic family in Calcutta. His father died when he was very young, so he was raised by his grandfather. When he went to school, his classmates were the Tagore family, Rabindranath Tagore and his brothers. Those were his peers growing up. He received a very good education from the British schools of his time. And when he was a young man, finishing his college education, his family friends appointed him to, because he was very responsible, appointed him to a manager of a large factory or company or something like that. And one of the first things he did when reviewing the finances, they saw that there was an error. They had overcharged a customer, so he found the customer and reimbursed the customer because they had overcharged him. The owner of the business found out that he did that and said, "I think you have the wrong job. You should be a school teacher or something like that. You're too honest." And so he went that path. He very quickly was recognized as a very capable person. The British started giving him appointments in different posts. Very soon he became a district magistrate in the government service. And so his career went like that. It just kept going and going and going and going and going. And we're going to read something about his life. But the major contributions are about 8. He wrote 100 books. Ever try writing a book? He wrote 100 books. He was the deputy magistrate or high court judge in Jagannath Puri, which was it was never done by the British, appointing a local person in that post, because he's right below the governor as far as authority and power and influence, but because he was so good. He settled major problems on behalf of the government. We discussed this on Sunday. We had some discussion about his life. He had 10 children. Keeps you busy, right? How many children do you have? 2? 2? 10? And of those 10 children, 1 became an acharya in the disciplic line. He established the birthplace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is a very important personality in our line of disciplic succession, without details. It was very significant, very significant. He will hear he was fluent in about 8 different languages, and he wrote in several of those languages, some of his books. But for people in Bengal, he established what in this country we now have as Bhakti Vriksha groups, which is modeled after what he did, which was called Namahata, or he would go into the interiors of Bengal and find a village elder who was literate. Then he would teach the village elder through the medium of songs, because Bengalis like songs. So he would teach the philosophy through songs, and then had a collection of a little question, answer, that he would have the village elder lead a discussion, and then another section making up a book eventually. It was part of the plan, that they would have then a manual of understanding the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, the teachings of the Vedas, in a question-answer format for very simple people. And some of his literatures were all in Sanskrit for the highly educated, and all kinds of things in between. And his literary contribution and the reaching, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these branches of Namahata. He met regularly with intellectuals and government leaders, helping them to understand, because during his time it was the height of British rule, and British rule meant the propaganda was everything European is good and everything Indian is backwards. And the intelligentsia were trained up in British education, and they bought into that. And he, by reading in his mid-30s, was when he first started getting Srimad Bhagavatam, like you have now in your home, but it wasn't available. But a friend of his had a copy. So he read it twice, and then started, within 1 year, he's writing a book about the Bhagavatam, and helping the intellectuals of his time understand it in language that, because they're very heavily Christian influenced, and anti-Vedas influenced. So, he helped them understand it. It's a very brilliant essay. And then profusely read the writings of Lord Chaitanya and his followers, without the Sandarbhas and Chaitanya Charitamrita and other books that you'll learn about as you go along. And then he wrote books to explain them to everybody. He was a visionary. He, in 1896, so when he's maybe about 40, 45 years of age, something like that, he, maybe 50 years of age, he, in English, at his own expense, he wrote an 86-page booklet called Sri Chaitanya, His Life and Precepts, and sent it to universities around the world, because his vision was at least the intellectual people should know who is Lord Chaitanya and what his teachings are, because he was, he had studied many, many, many things and had, was learned in many, many, many things, but had enormous faith in Lord Chaitanya. So he felt educated people should know who he is. And that was the same year, that 1896, was the same year that Srila Prabhupada was born. So he also predicted that the day will come when a great personality will come and take these teachings all over the world, widely and effectively. And that same year, in that one year, 1896, he wrote 5 books. He wrote 5 books. One of them was a book that's about this thick. It has 4 main parts, and it's a summary of 2 of Rupa Goswami's books. Another one was the 10 essential teachings of Lord Chaitanya, called Dasa Mula, root, Dasa Mula, 10 essential teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And so we've been spending some time, particularly this past Sunday, spent some time just reviewing his life and his contributions. So because this is the Disappearance Day, I'd like to read some section from his biography. Yeah. The title of the book is The Seventh Goswami. Seventh Goswami. Okay. The seventh Goswami. The first 6 Goswamis were followers of Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya had many, 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 many important followers. 6 were particularly prominent. He sent each one of them to Vrindavan to write literature on the science of devotion to Krishna and to establish the places of Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan, to restore them, because thousands of years had passed and they were lost for public understanding. He's called the 7th Goswami because he did something similar. The places of Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, he began identifying where they were and writing books that were the writings and the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, very similar to what the 6 Goswamis did in Vrindavan. He did in Bengal, or in Navadvip. That's the title, the 7th Goswami. So he was affectionately known by that name because of the major, 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 major contribution that he made. So I'm going to read a little section that's towards the end of his life. He had, so for a long time, he was a deputy magistrate or a high court judge in the British government in Puri. And it was a very important place for the British government. We'll hear some of the value that the British government placed in Jagannath Puri and the work of their other officers and the work of Bhakti Vinod. He, at some point in time, he wanted to have a transfer from his service in Puri to go to where Lord Chaitanya had held his childhood pastimes. And that's in West Bengal, in Mayapur. So 4 or 5 times they declined. They really wanted him to stay there because he was so good. So then he quit. So then they transferred him. And he spent some time there. He established a place. We saw some pictures of it on Sunday. He gave it a name, Swananda Sukhada Kunj. And it's he said it's a place where Lord Nityananda, who was Lord Chaitanya's associate, who assisted Lord Chaitanya in establishing these outreach places in the villages of West Bengal, the Namahata program. So he made that his headquarters. The British ruler, just to accommodate him, built a railroad track that stopped right in front of his house. It went a little further, but it was a narrow gauge railroad track. It's still there, specifically so that he could stay where he wanted to stay and come to the capital, Krishnanagar, and preside over the court and then go back home in the evening. They built a railroad track for him. He was so valued. After some time, he then wanted to finish his business with the government. And so he wrote so many books, and then he decided to go into the renounced order of life. And he established a place in Puri, not where he was living as a householder, but where he was going to live as a renounced man. That he called it Bhakti Kuti, or Bhakti Kutir, a place where he could do his bhajan. So that's where I'm going to read. The title is this Bhakti Kuti. That's in Puri. And Swananda Sukhada Kunj, which is the place in Mayapur. That's the title of the chapter. At the turn of the century, Bhakti Vinod Thakura was inspired to return to Jagannath Puri, the site of the final pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. His son, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who had recently been initiated by Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, stayed there in his association as a Naishtika Brahmachari. Naishtika Brahmachari means he never became married for his life. He was a celibate Brahmachari. One of his 10 sons. He was performing bhajan in the renounced mood near the samadhi of Srila Haridas Thakur. Srila Haridas Thakur, it was one of the important associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He was born in a Muslim family, but he had a natural, innate attraction for chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra. In fact, every day he would chant all day for his whole life. He would chant 3 times 64 rounds of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra every day. That was his daily practice. That's a lot of chanting every day. In order to facilitate his son's worship, Bhakti Vinod Thakur had the temple repaired and cleaned. Daily, the two of them, the father and the son, gave lectures, and the Thakur established a place of bhajan a short distance from the ocean, near the samadhi of Haridas Thakur, which he called Bhakti Kuti. Later, when there was severe controversy arising from the attempt of the Thakur and Saraswati, his son, to correct the deviations of this Babaji, the Thakur instructed his son to perform his bhajan in Mayapur. So the situation was, there was a very popular fellow. His name was Radharaman Charan Das Babaji. And he took the mantra and made his own mantra. And he trained his chief follower to become a gopi by dressing his chief follower, a male, as a gopi in a sari. And told him, to do this and do that and behave like a gopi, because that's what he was going to become in his next life. And Bhaktisiddhanta was like really strong. He spoke strongly and strongly and strongly and strongly against this practice. And the mantra was a mantra that had mixed rasa, rasa basa. So he spoke strongly about that, and it became a big furor. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, I think you should go to Mayapur and just chant Hare Krishna. And so he did. And he took a vow to chant the same number of rounds that Haridas Thakur chanted, several billion names. It took him several years, every day, chanting 3 times 64 rounds a day. Superhuman. There was another person who had become Bhaktivinoda Thakur's assistant, and eventually he became his disciple, named Krishna Das. And Krishna Das was with Bhaktivinoda while in Puri. He spent again some time in Mayapur, and when Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Samadhi is in Mayapur, and 1 year after Bhaktivinoda Thakur left, so did Krishna Das, and his Samadhi is right next to Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Samadhi. They had a very close bond of affection. The Thakur stayed in Puri for some time, but he eventually returned to his place in Godrum, or Svananda Sukata Kunj, where he continued to chant and translate and write books. In 1900, one of his most important works, Sri Harinam Chintamani, was published. It presented the teachings of Haridas Thakur about the holy name and other important aspects of spiritual practice, as collected from various Gaudiya Vaishnava literatures. It describes the structure of the book. In his concluding remarks in that book, Bhaktivinoda describes how he came to write the book, as he did. Quote, "How I was inspired to compile this work is a mystery which I felt improper to disclose, as it might constitute spiritual conceit. Subsequently, I realized that it would be a slight against my spiritual master, which might stand as an obstacle on the path of my spiritual progress. And therefore, without any shame, I record the fact that, while under the benediction of my guru," gives his name, "I was meditating deeply upon Srimad Bhagavatam one day, when a vision of Sri Sarup Damodar, the intimate adherent of Sri Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, instructed me to compile the verses of the Bhagavata in accordance with the principles of Abhideya, Sambandha, and Prayojana." That's a different book. This is Bhagavat Arkamarichimala. Yeah. So, yeah, that's right. Bhagavat Arkamarichimala. That's 1901. So let's go back. Lord Chaitanya lived in Puri. The two associates who were with Lord Chaitanya constantly were Sarup Damodar and Ramananda Roy. Lord Chaitanya in Krishna Lila is Krishna himself, in the mood and the complexion of Radharani. So Radha and Krishna always had, particularly Radharani, had two main gopi associates, Lalita and Vishaka. And Lalita was Ramananda Roy, Vishaka was Sarup Damodar. So this Sarup Damodar appeared, it's called Avirbhav. He appeared like a vision before him. We saw a painting of this on Sunday. He saw a vision of him before him. And Sarup Damodar instructed him, I want you to write this book. You're absorbed in the Bhagavatam. Write a book that's just a structure of the topics of the Srimad. It's topic by topic by topic. There's an index at the beginning. So many topics. And then verses that illustrate or embellish or reveal each of the topics. That's the structure. And then in detail, Sarup Damodar explained the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. You have in your home a copy of Srimad Bhagavatam, 111 Bhagavatam. That first verse is the first part of the book Bhagavat Arkamarichimala, written in the year 1901. It's this message, it comes at the very end of the book where he says, actually I shouldn't reveal this. But I've been making an offense to my spiritual master, Bipin Bihari Goswami, and making an offense to him if I didn't mention. So here I go. Sarup Damodar instructed me to write this book, how to write it, what it should be made up of, and instructed me in the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. So that's what's in the first part of his book. In the same year, it's this 1901, Bhakti Vinod published an edition of Padma Purana. And he wrote another book, Sankalpa Druma, by Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur, with Bengali prose translations. Very prolific writer. Next year, he wrote a supplement of a book he had written 2 years earlier, Harinam Chintamani, called Bhajana Rahasya. And Bhajana Rahasya. So he's in this renounced mood, still a very intense personality in his writing skills. So it's giving very specific details of during the 8 periods of the day, how one can execute devotional practices towards achieving total absorption in Radha and Krishna Bhakti. In 1904, he published another book, Sat Kriya Saradipika. Sat Kriya Saradipika is a book written by Gopal Bhatta Goswami. Maybe I should go ahead and read something. These books, it gives you an idea. You don't know who everybody is. Gopal Bhatta was one of the 6 Goswamis. In his childhood, he was the son of the chief priest in Sri Rangam. Lord Chaitanya, by invitation of the chief priest of Sri Rangam, stayed in his home for 4 months during the rainy season. And that's where there was interaction between him and his 6-year-old son Gopal, who later became one of the Goswamis in Vrindavan. And while he stayed there with his parents until they departed this world. Then he went to Vrindavan under the order of Mahaprabhu to do that. And he had written a manual on details and details and details and details and details of deity worship, because he was the son of the chief priest of Sri Rangam. So he knew all the details of the mantras and procedures and everything, which is a book that followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are also aware of. I mean, for example, some of our priests that do performances of yagyas, etc., They just follow the Satkriya Deepika. So he published a version of it. Satkriya Sara Deepika. 2 years later, another book, Prema Vivarta. Prema Vivarta is a nice book. It's kind of skinny, so it's easy to read. And it's a description of one of Lord Chaitanya's associates named Jagatananda, and Prema Vivarta means hidden love. He was a sannyasi, and a very unusual, very intimate relationship with Mahaprabhu. So his moods of love for Lord Chaitanya is the subject matter of that book. I'm going to go forward because there's so many things about books that he wrote. Though incapable of commenting on such topics with any degree of competence, the author of this book, feels compelled to at least state his appreciation of the valuable nectarian instructions and amazing blessings given by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in this other writing, his final message to this world. Yet there is more to be told. The Thakur's son, Lalit Prasad, in his biographical notes, tells the story of Sir William Duke. And I represented this not correctly on Sunday, so this is now giving me a chance to correct it. In 1908, just 3 months before Bhaktivinoda adopted the Paramahansa, the renowned stage of life, one of his sons, one of Sir William Duke's sons, who at the time was working at the Writers' Building in Calcutta, came home one day and informed his father, one of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's sons, sorry. So Sir William Duke was in town. Who was Sir William Duke? He was the chief secretary of the whole state of Bengal, chief secretary of the British government for the whole state of Bengal. And so Bhaktivinoda Thakur made an appointment to have a meeting with him. He agreed to have a meeting. He came into his office, and immediately Sir William Duke offered an apology. He said, "When you were district magistrate, I wanted to take you out of office. I thought if there were many men as qualified as you in Bengal, then the English would have to leave." Sir William used to read the judgments that Bhaktivinoda Thakur passed in his court cases, and was amazed at the great wisdom they reflected. On several occasions he had visited Bhaktivinoda at his home and observed how he was absorbed in writing his Chaitanya Shikshamrita. Bhaktivinoda's wife used to feed him a lunch of puri, luchi, and sweets whenever he came. He was astounded at the constant activity of Bhaktivinoda. He then admitted that he had considered Bhaktivinoda's extraordinary abilities a threat to British control. But now he begged Bhaktivinoda Thakur's forgiveness. The English custom was that when a man grows old, he would approach everyone he had ever offended and beg their pardon so he could pass away peacefully. Nice custom. After hearing Sir William Duke's apology, the Thakur replied, "I consider you to be a good friend and well-wisher all along." Later, Bhaktivinoda Thakur admitted to being astonished that this man had wanted to do him harm, but he was so pleased by his repentant attitude that he gave him all blessings. Now he went into this renounced stage of life, did his solitary bhajan. He accepted some disciples One of them was this Krishna Das we mentioned already. He engaged in solitary bhajan for some period of time, and he left his body. The same day that Gadadhar Pandit had left the world, 450 years before, precisely at noon, Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he's in Puri, he entered Samadhi. At that time, his last remains, or his ashes, were taken from Bhakti Bhavan and brought to his home in Godrumdreep, in in Mayapur. There they were placed in a silver urn and buried in the midst of a huge kirtan and festival held in his honor by his disciples and friends. Hundreds took part, and his direct presence was experienced by everyone. Truly, the Thakur's great stanza, composed in glorification of Haridas Thakur, applies to him. He reasons ill who tells that Vaishnavas die when thou art living still and sound. The Vaishnavas die to live, and living try to spread the holy life around. So that's it's in English and it rhymes. So this last section is his qualities and the summary of his qualities in his life. Prabhupada gave a summary on the occasion of Gaur Purnima, Lord Chaitanya's appearance day in 1969. Quote, "It was the desire of Bhakti Vinod Thakur to spread the life and precepts of Lord Chaitanya in the Western countries. So, with this in view, of publishing the book Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, His Life and Precepts, he sent copies to various universities' libraries, and one of the copies was found in the McGill University in Montreal. After 72 years, this book was found in the library by one of our students, and he brought it to me. From a materialistic point of view, I was born in a different family, and Bhakti Vinod Thakur belonged to a different family, and my spiritual master, Bhakti Siddhanta, happened to be the fifth son of Bhakti Vinod Thakur. Although at home, Bhakti Vinod Thakur was actually the spiritual master of my spiritual master, he still recommended Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati when he was a young man, about 18 years old, that you go to Gorkishore Babaji and become initiated by him." Okay, so I'm going to go forward and read some other things. He wrote hundreds of books, some published, some in course of time being published. All this became possible because he was a sincere, faithful servant. To write so many books with so many responsibilities for an ordinary magistrate is not possible, but because he was sincere, he got the strength from the Supreme Lord. One does not need to seek strength separate from the Supreme Lord, but if you are sincere, the Supreme will give you sufficient strength. Actually, Bhakti Vinod Thakur brought my Guru Maharaj to the world, to this world, to be his son. He prayed to Lord Chaitanya that your preaching and teaching have become so much depreciated, it is not in my power to correct them. He prayed to Lord Chaitanya, and after his prayer, Lord Chaitanya sent my Guru Maharaj as his son, and he took up the matter seriously. Okay. In another biography, Bhakti Siddhanta is described this way. He identifies three major areas of the Thakur's achievements. First, his books and writings in various languages dealing with the science of Krishna consciousness, as found in the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the revealed scriptures. Second, the discovery of Lord Chaitanya's actual birthplace. And third, the innovations he introduced for the purpose of preaching the teachings of Lord Chaitanya and the six Goswamis throughout the world. He established the deities of Lord Chaitanya and Srimati Vishnupriya at Mayapur. Anyways, I'm going to go forward a little bit, and there's some other biographies that are very nice glorifications about his character. One of those persons he was commissioned to write about his life. He wrote a short biography in 1916. He explained that Bhakti Vinod Thakur was so charitably disposed that no one ever went away from his home disheartened, and he who once called on him was sure to meet him again with a smiling face. Bhakti Vinod befriended men regardless of their rank, a phenomena especially visible when he widely preached the holy name. He never bore any grudges, and those who were jealous of him or attempted to impede him in his spiritual mission were, in the long run, ashamed of their conduct and often came begging his pardon, which he never refused. His sense of universal brotherhood made him the friend of all, and he was always eager for the benefit of all. Whoever contacted him was immeasurably benefited. The Thakur was never proud, and his amiable disposition was a characteristic feature of his life. He never uttered a word that would injure another's feelings, and he never chastised anyone unless he was perfectly confident that he had the right to do so for that person's welfare. On the other hand, whoever received a warning from him always felt himself purified by the experience. He did not possess the least shadow of vanity, although he was honored and respected throughout Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. His profound knowledge of philosophy endeared him to the educated, and his devout bhakti made him a friend of both the gentle and the ruffians. As a government official, he was always taken into confidence by the British officials, and he was consequently well acquainted with the reasoning behind government decisions. He had witnessed the hard days of the Great Mutiny. I don't know what that is. It was in capital letters, Great Mutiny. And while he was in office, he assisted quelling many disturbances. His administrative ability was marked even by the ruling chief, His Highness something, 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 something. British people always esteemed his counsels and respected him as a friend and an honorary advisor of the state. The government of Bengal also, on more than one occasion, wanted to vest him with honors and titles, but he humbly declined the same each time on the ground that such honors would, instead of doing him good, stand against his holy mission. Even so late as 1897, when the plague raged furiously in the heart of Calcutta, his advice was valued and adopted by Sir John Woodburn, British fellow. Another biographer describes his extraordinary morality. Never was a man found more strict in the observance of the moral duties than our Thakur. From his very infancy till the last day, he was a great advocate of truth and never allowed his associates to deviate from the path of duty, which he himself observed with more than strict accuracy. He avoided companies whenever he had the least suspicion of evil motives in them, and never harbored them so long they did not come to repentance. He had encountered unpleasantness on many occasions, semicolon, in the execution of public duty under the government by refusing to accept any present from any person. He was above corruption. He never supported the least shadow of immorality and never crossed the threshold of any place which he knew to be immoral. He had a great dislike for theaters, as these were places where public women were brought in to take part in the play. He knew that common people who cared little for religion and who had generally happy-go-lucky days to spend were apt to go astray in the broad wilderness of the world if he himself refrained from showing them the proper way by his own example. Example is better than precept, so his absolute distaste for anything immoral helped many good souls to open their eyes, and also persons already in confusion to correct themselves. Here's an example. When the well-known dramatist Girish Chandra Ghosh came to request him for presiding over a gathering at the opening day of a well-known play, Chaitanya Leela, he had to politely decline the offer. And it's explained why. There was a lady who was playing Lord Chaitanya, and instead another priest, Ramakrishna, attended to the guest of honor instead. Although the play was very popular and well received, we see that Thakura would not lend his dignity and authority to such a mundane presentation. He was a complete abstainer and a perfect teetotaler and never chewed even a betel. The word, quote, debt was unknown to him, and he was very prompt in making payments. He was always true to his word, and punctuality was at all times specially observed in him. Thakura was courageous and acted for the welfare of everyone. He kept his personal needs to a bare minimum and led the simplest of lives, avoiding the indulgences of worldly men. Now, there's another section that gives some predictions, and that's where I'm going to end. He proposed that all contending theories and religions could be unified through the scientific teachings of Lord Chaitanya. For the universal religion of all souls is devotional service to the Supreme Lord. It was his specific desire that the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu be spread all over the world. He had a monthly journal called Sajjana Toshini, in which he wrote, Mahaprabhu did not descend with all his associates to deliver a certain number of human beings in the land of India, but rather his purpose was to deliver and uplift all living beings in all countries of the world by practicing the eternal religion of all souls. And he quoted Chaitanya Bhagavat, where it says, my name will be preached in all the countries and towns that exist throughout the world. He then prayerfully invoked the Lord and expressed his heartfelt desire. There are many kinds of religion in the world, and among all of them, the highest development of religion is the congregational chanting of the Supreme Lord's divine names. Of this there is no doubt. Alas, when will that day come when all greatly fortunate souls in all countries, such as England, France, Russia, Prussia, and America, will take up banners, kettle drums, mridangas, and kartals, and thus cause the ecstatic waves of Harinam, Kirtan, and the singing of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's holy name to rise in the streets of their towns and cities? When will that day come when pure and transcendental Vaishnava Prema will be the only religion of all souls, and all tiny sectarian religions will meet in the unlimited and universal religion of Vaishnavism as rivers merge into the great ocean? When will that day come? And there's many. I'll read. It's a long quote. Whatever a pure devotee wants from his master, Lord Krishna doubtlessly grants, because he has no other duty than to fulfill the desire of his devotee. If you desire the deliverance of all living entities within the universe, this is Lord Chaitanya to Vasudeva Datta. If you desire the deliverance of all living entities within the universe, then all of them can be delivered, even without your undergoing the tribulations of sinful activities. Krishna is not incapable, for he has all potencies. Why would he induce you to suffer the sinful reactions of other living beings? Whosoever's welfare you desire immediately becomes a Vaishnava, and Krishna delivers all Vaishnavas from the actions of their past sinful activities. Because of your honest desire, all living entities within the universe will be delivered, for Krishna does not have to do anything to deliver all the living entities of the universe. That's a verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita. In answer to the prayers of Satchitananda Bhakti Vinod Thakura, the great personification of compassion and mercy, followers have been very active in helping to fulfill his predictions. Specifically, another prediction is the day will come when the streets of Navadvip, with arms raised, singing the names of the Lord, they'll call out Jai Sachinandana, Jai Sachinandana, at a time when, Mayapur was just agricultural fields. The day will come. So he was a visionary. I remember one morning walk in Mayapur. The morning walks, what it means, very promptly at 6 o'clock, Srila Prabhupada would come down from his room, down the flight of stairs, and go for a walk in this way or that way, the other way. One morning, it's agricultural fields in all directions, except for buildings. And Prabhupada was in a mood of glorifying Bhakti Vinod Thakur. It was like this, saying he did this and he did that and he did the other thing and he did the other thing. And someone said when he was like he had 10 mouths. He was just happy glorifying Bhakti Vinod and his visions. So one devotee said, why didn't he take Krishna consciousness all over the world? And Prabhupada looked down and said, he left something for us to do. Bhakti Vinod Thakur envisioned, maybe, I don't know if you and your family, do you know what the temple of Vedic planetarium is? Have you heard that? No. No. Okay. It's being built in Mayapur now. Prabhupada called it, it's Radha, like our temple is Radha Shyamsundar Mandir. ISKCON Radha Shyamsundar Mandir. So some name like that. He called it Temple of Vedic Planetarium. Meaning, what he wanted, Prabhupada had a vision, he wanted people from all over the world to see a planetarium that in 3-dimension depicts Vedic cosmology. And he described it over and over and over again, and he had people working on it and described how it would look and so forth and so on. And it's being built. There's 3 domes. One is the main temple. Another is an altar for Lord Nrsingadev, because according to Vaishnava culture, Lord Nrsingadev should have his own altar. And over here is another dome, is the Vedic planetarium. And the Vedic planetarium, by Prabhupada's instructions, will have a chandelier-like apparatus that's suspended from the dome, and part of it is going to be a moving depiction from the Bhumandala, this earthly realm, Bhuvarloka and Svargaloka, and the planets in between, moving on Kala Chakra, the movements of the sun, as the sun is moving in its orbit annually, and then the other bodies above the sun, as they move up to, the heavenly planets, up to Dhruvaloka, the pole star, because all the planets are pivoting around in a clockwise direction, vertical but clockwise direction around Dhruva's planet, the pole star. And then above, Maharloka, Janaloka, Tapaloka, Brahmaloka is part. So there's going to be a depiction, a three-dimensional depiction of the structure of the universe. The temple of Vedic planetarium. So scientists are going to come check it out, and scholars are going to come check it out, and religionists are going to come check it out, and they're going to get to go to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's birthplace. But putting on display, this is what the Vedas have to say. The scientists have to say what they have to say. This is what the Vedas have to say about the structure of the universe. In details and details and details and details and details. And different exhibits around the perimeter of the dome that take you and saying, you look out over here, there's Maharloka, there's Janaloka, there's Tapaloka, this is what's over there. So people will learn the structure of the universe, and then interactive displays, they press a button and it tells them what's going on over there. It's very, very sophisticated. I hope the technology works. India's another story. But they have the capacity to do that. That's their plan. So how did that come about? It came about from Bhakti Vinod Thakura, not exactly the Vedic planetarium part, but a very, 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 very large structure. It's mentioned in Ananta Samhita, and Bhakti Vinod Thakura twice had a vision of this rising, effulgent, towering structure in the sky. So it's fulfilling Bhakti Vinod Thakura's prediction so many years later. As Prabhupada said, he left something for us to do. So this is just some of the devotee that wrote this book. Sri Radhika had a question. Remember Sri Radhika's question? Her question was, during the British rule, they did some bad things. So how could Bhakti Vinod Thakur work under the British when they were doing bad things? And he didn't, so I gave her the address of Rupa Vilas. He wrote back a really long reply, because he's doing a rewrite on this book. And he didn't really answer her question. But he's really enthusiastic to share the fruits of his research. Because he's a very important person. Very important person. I mean, you write 100 books, and you're a very important person. And the range of what he wrote was amazing, et cetera, et cetera. And all the things that during his time, British rule was at its peak, which also meant that the followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu were really low. There had been deviations from his teachings, and he had to correct that. He had to restore faith in the intelligentsia, that no, wait a minute, not everything European is great and everything India is backwards. The ancient Vedic literature are very rich and very valuable. So he had an uphill climb. But look where he wanted it to go. All over the world, people should hear who was Lord Chaitanya and his teachings. Very important person. So I gave her the name of two other biographers of Bhakti Vinod Thakur's life, and maybe they'll respond with an explanation. But there's a lot to be learned about. Historians know things that most of us don't know. let's see what kind of, I'll ask her to share that with you, and you can share with the others if she gets a good answer to her question. Let's see, Bhakti Vinod Thakur ki jai. So let's see if there's some discussion. He's giving you a choice. You have a relationship with the family, apparently, yeah? Okay.
Maharaj, regarding Sri Radhika's question, could it be that Bhaktivinoda Thakur, being very politically astute, he knew that working with them, he could get more accomplished rather than being an outspoken critic?
Well, there's a section that I was looking for that I couldn't find. No, it was exactly in something that Rupa Vilas wrote. The British were actually very respectful for practical purposes. They're very respectful of the religious practice of the locals, because they knew if they rubbed against the religious practice of the locals, they wouldn't be able to rule. They would have a revolt. So they instructed, they wanted Bhaktivinoda Thakur, because he was so good, to do what he was doing. And yes, it allowed him to fulfill the purpose of his mission, because he could use his position to help fulfill his mission. But these sections that Rupa Vilas sent, they were actually very respectful of him. I mean, they saw him as a threat because he was too good, but very respectful of him and respectful of the local people and their worship. It even gave instruction for someone was newly appointed as something or other, a governor in Rasa. When you go to Puri, make sure that the priests are well cared for. If they ever ask for protection when they're having festivals, make sure that they get protection. They have some system of extracting taxes. Whatever has been the system for receiving the taxes that they need in order to take care of their worship, make sure that that's taken care of. Give your full support to the. So the picture that they just did, all they did was wicked, manipulative things, is not the full picture. But so yes, and he was able to influence people that weren't straight. He had that capacity by his culture, his spiritual potency, his strength. So they would change their ways if they were not straight. Some. He had the power to do that.
Maharaj, it seemed like his son Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur also had the same mood, using his position to influence and to support the Vaishnavas.
I'm not sure what you're saying. Bhakti Siddhanta's mood was very different than Bhakti Vinod's.
Mm-hmm.
Bhakti Siddhanta's mood was confrontational. Bhakti Vinod Thakur's was humble persuasion. You have something?
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. I know the last day you had mentioned he worshipped Gaur Gadadhar, but the book says he also established Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Vishnu Priya.
Yeah.
Do we know a little more about that? Because Vishnu Priya and, is not, we don't see a lot of...
That's in the birthplace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There was a deity in the birthplace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That's where that deity is established. And there's 3 altars. That's one of the altars. Recognizing, Mahaprabhu in his Grahastha phase of life, which was in Mayapur. And when he left the Grahastha ashram, he left Mayapur. So that was the mood. It's not the only mood, but it's one of the moods of Bhakti Vinod Thakur in his birthplace, specifically. You can go online, you can find pictures. Birthplace of Mahaprabhu in Mayapur.
Maharaj, the Great Mutiny was probably the Sepoy Mutiny in 1957, which was, 1857.
1857.
Which was a great...
I don't know that you're from Bengal, so I don't know. So he had a role to help when there was upheavals or plague or something or so mischief or something. He had a capacity to wisely navigate through that problem because he was very caring and very wise. The details is not mentioned. I don't know.
I don't know if it is, it sounds silly, but he entered, for his disappearance, past time he entered the Babaji lifestyle, means stopped preaching. He stopped preaching.
He was writing, but he wasn't going about here and there. He went, for a period of time, it was solitary, nirjan bhajan. He just locked himself up and didn't go out. Now, that was a stage of his life, and he was qualified. It wasn't imitative, it was a stage of his life. Prabhupada didn't do that, Bhaktisiddhanta didn't do that, but he did that.
Guru Maharaj, is there a reason why he wasn't officially like a spiritual master for Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur? We read that he was spiritual master at home, but then he encouraged him to seek out. Is there?
What's your question?
So is there a reason why he couldn't initiate his son? Yes.
Because it's not part of the culture. The father doesn't initiate his son. It's part of the culture, Vaishnav culture. So he wanted Gorkishore, who was not his father, to initiate his son. The father doesn't give diksha to the son. It's just like, here's another example that you probably are familiar with. Gopal Bhatta did not receive diksha from his father. Gopal Bhatta received diksha from his uncle in Sri Rangam, because the father doesn't give diksha to the son. Diksha means give mantra. Now, Bhakti Vinod, when his son was very young, he gave him a Kurma deity and a mantra to say along with the Kurma deity, but it wasn't a formal diksha. Okay? Are you two the same age? Who's older? Okay. How much older? 1 year? Oh, pretty close to the same age, right? But you're the elder. So you have to show by good example how to be a good example for the younger friend. Go ahead.
Maharaj, we see that in the case of great devotees, so many of their children or certain family members, although they're in association with such a great personality almost constantly, they don't. They're not attracted to the path of bhakti, or not so much. And we say, fire burns regardless of where it is. So the association of devotees is always purifying. We see Srila Prabhupada's children, his wife, and similarly Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he had 10 children. The other 9 we don't hear so much about. So is it, and that maybe also relates to my question about Duryodhana, is there something that is, if the heart is...
Well, it's two ways. It's to give and to receive. Lalit Prasad, who was another one of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's sons, was a Vaishnav. He had his own ways of doing things, etc. So he doesn't get the same spotlight as Bhaktisiddhanta or Bimal Prasad. We don't hear of his receiving Diksha, for example. But there's the opportunity for having elevated association in a family or otherwise. And then there's receptivity. And when the receptivity is poor, the signal doesn't come through so strongly. So both. Now, was there eternal spiritual benefit? What karmically brought about the other 8 children of Bhaktivinoda Thakur? Why did they have that good fortune? Something, but their receptivity wasn't the same. So it's both. Bhaktisiddhanta was pretty exceptional, a ray of Vishnu from childhood. Pretty exceptional. Advaitacharya is another example. Online question.
This is from Amara Mataji.
I can hear.
This is from Amara Mataji. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur did not like the play, and he did not go for a play where Lord Chaitanya was being played by a woman. How to understand this? Could you kindly help understand his mood in this regard?
Amara has the service of creating dramas and plays for the temple. This coming weekend, she has a half an hour slot. I don't even know what the title of the thing is. But she's going to, organize a drama. So she picked up on that one right away. How do we understand it? It was explained. We don't have to go beyond what was explained. He was cautious about having his profile being, engaged in ways that there was some questionable conduct. So it's not only that there was a female that was playing the part of Lord Chaitanya. One can assume there's other features of this female that weren't so good. Maybe she was like a good actress or something, but some other parts of her character were not so good. And so he didn't want his name to be part of that. And the man that was the playwright was a celebrity, but that he didn't want to just rub shoulders with celebrities. He was a moralist or a theist, and wanted to uphold those principles as his who he was, his mission, his identity. So he didn't compromise. That's how to understand.
Another question from Rajeshwari Pranmataji. This is out of curiosity.
Could you hold the microphone straight like this?
We see the pictures of some acharyas holding the beads.
Holding
Beads.
beads.
But Bhaktivinoda Thakur didn't show his beads to anyone else.
He didn't show his bead, but he had a bead bag.
Any significance of this?
He didn't hold his beads up, but he had a bead bag. Many photos, because their photography was coming into fashion at that time. So many photos where he's holding books on his one side and his bead bag in the other hand. Books in japa. He just didn't show his beads. That's all. That's it. Anything else? Our hostess, anything? I'm looking at our hostess. And you'd like to contribute something?
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. Hare Krishna
Oh,
Guru
there we go.
Maharaj.
There we go.
We are so happy to have you here, and it's a great honor for us visiting here. I have no questions, by the way, but we seek your blessings. And we need to improve in Krishna consciousness with your blessings.
Confirmed. Okay. So you both, you and your husband, grow together in Krishna consciousness, and your children will watch you and see what that's like. And then they'll decide how much, if anything, they want to do following your nice example. Okay.
Maharaj, I was thinking how in the Gopis' song of separation, the Gopis glorify the preachers who preach the glories of Lord Krishna, and how we see all these, his own intimate associates, they're coming to and preaching and spreading the glories, and we see how, Ramanand Roy and Sarup Damodar, Vishakha and Lalita, and we see and these acharyas are all manjaris, right, Maharaj? And so they are also playing such a big role in glorifying the Lord, rather than just being in the spiritual world. I was just thinking that if you can elaborate further on this point, Maharaj.
You're doing a pretty good job. It's the mood of service. And they have very elevated mood of service. And those who have an elevated mood of service want to share that mood and, the katha with others. That's Lord Chaitanya. And the followers of Lord Chaitanya, they like in the mood of service. Now, it doesn't have to be, it can be, but it doesn't have to be in the mood of conjugal rasa or gopis and manjaris and so forth. Many of Lord Chaitanya's associates and subsequent generations of followers were like that, but that's not a requirement. The requirement is the mood of service. Look at Lord Nityananda and his associates, and they were all in the mode of cowherd boys. They were unstoppable, completely ecstatic. So, not a requirement. Mode of service is the requirement. Okay, I think think we'll end there. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Prabhupada ki jai.